In 1961, you answer an advertisement for a psychology study at Yale University. You are paid $4.50. A researcher in a white laboratory coat explains the roles. You are the teacher, and a pleasant middle-aged man is the learner. The learner is strapped into a chair in an adjacent room. You sit before a panel of switches ranging from 15 to 450 volts. Every time the learner gives a wrong answer, you must deliver a shock, increasing the voltage with every mistake. As the mistakes continue, the learner's reactions escalate. He grunts at 75 volts. He shouts that the shocks are painful at 120. By 300 volts, the learner stops responding entirely. Whenever you look to the researcher for a way out, he delivers 4 standardized prods. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. Stanley Milgram designed this scenario to test the limits of human nature. He wanted to know exactly how far an ordinary person would go in inflicting pain on a stranger, simply because they were told to do so. Milgram's inquiry began in the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust. Psychology and philosophy were struggling to explain how ordinary citizens had participated in a state-sponsored bureaucratic apparatus of mass murder. At the time, the dominant explanation was clinical, the pathology theory. It suggested that the atrocities were the result of a specifically German cultural or psychological defect, a unique inclination towards obedience. This theory was being challenged by the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961. Eichmann organized the logistics of the Holocaust not as a sadistic monster, but as a bureaucrat who claimed he was merely following the rules of his department. Milgram believed the capacity to commit these acts was a universal human trait rather than a cultural anomaly. He set out to prove that authority could override individual conscience in anyone, anywhere. Before the experiment, Milgram asked psychiatrists to predict the results. They estimated that only 1 to 3% of participants, the extreme outliers of human psychology, would actually administer the maximum 450-volt shock. The actual result was 65%. Nearly 2/3 of the psychologically normal people in Milgram's study continued all the way to the end of the panel, past the screams and into the silence. The shocks were a deception, and the learner was an actor who felt nothing. But for the participant, the moral weight of delivering those shocks was entirely real. To explain why so many people obeyed, Milgram proposed a theory called the agentic state. He argued that participants had undergone a psychological shift. In this state, an individual stops viewing themselves as a moral agent responsible for their own actions. Instead, they see themselves merely as an instrument of the authority figure's will, transferring all moral responsibility to the person giving the orders. This scientific finding appeared to validate philosopher Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. It provided a data-backed explanation for how ordinary people, like those Eichmann described, could become part of a killing machine without seeing themselves as evil. Milgram's theory redefined human nature for decades. It suggested that under the right institutional pressure, the human conscience can be effectively switched off by the presence of an authority figure. The experiment faced immediate ethical criticism for the extreme psychological stress it placed on participants. These concerns were directly responsible for the creation of the modern ethical review processes that now govern all psychological research. Decades later, researchers gained access to Milgram's raw archives at Yale. The typewritten notes and recordings revealed significant discrepancies between the published study and what actually happened in the laboratory. Researcher Gina Perry found that Milgram's experimenters frequently ignored the standardized script. They improvised additional pressure, sometimes badgering participants dozens of times to continue, which likely inflated the obedience rates. Archive notes also suggested that many participants were skeptical of the setup. They suspected the shocks weren't real, meaning they weren't actually displaying obedience to a command to inflict pain. These flaws meant that the most famous study in the history of psychology was built on a compromised foundation. Resolving the question required a modern replication that could withstand rigorous scrutiny. In 2024, researchers conducted the most controlled replication of the Milgram paradigm to date. It utilized strictly standardized experimenter behavior and comprehensive screenings to ensure the welfare of the participants. The 2024 obedience rates were slightly lower than Milgram's original findings, yet they still far exceeded those initial 1 to 3% predictions. Even under modern, careful conditions, a significant number of people still followed instructions to deliver shocks. Crucially, the 2024 study recorded the participants' internal psychological states. It measured their stress levels and moral reactions in a way Milgram's original study never attempted. The data provided a new perspective on why people continue to obey. The modern measurements suggested Milgram's primary theory, the agentic state, had misinterpreted the psychology of the participants. Participants who delivered shocks showed elevated stress indicators and expressed intense moral discomfort. They were fully engaged with the ethical weight of their actions. This evidence contradicts the idea of the agentic state. The participants did not hand over their moral agency or enter a detached trance. They were fully aware that what they were doing was wrong, and they experienced the agony of that knowledge in real time. The 2024 study shows that people obey because the immediate social pressure of the situation, the presence of the authority figure, and the difficulty of breaking a social contract simply overpower their moral convictions. This gap between knowing something is wrong and having the strength to stop is a recurring theme in documented institutional harms. It suggests that individuals in complex systems often maintain a clear conscience while feeling that the pressures of their immediate environment make stopping impossible. Milgram's study once suggested that authority acts like a switch that turns off our conscience. The modern evidence is more disturbing. Our conscience stays on the entire time. It simply isn't always strong enough to make us stop.